I knew my marriage was over the second my wife's phone lit up in the dark, and a message flashed across her lock screen that said, "You left your earring in my truck." She snatched the phone so fast she nearly dropped it, then looked at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. We had been married 9 years, together for 12, and in that one ugly little moment, lying in bed beside the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, I felt something cold split straight through my chest. I actually laughed because my brain refused to catch up, and I said, "Tell me I read that wrong." And she rolled her eyes, tucked the phone under her pillow, and said, "You're being dramatic. It's from Melissa. She borrows my stuff all the time." Melissa did not drive a truck. Melissa drove a white SUV I had detailed for her last summer while my wife stood there smiling like we were all family. Up until then, I had been explaining away everything because that is what people like me do when we are terrified of looking stupid. The late nights were staff meetings. The locked bathroom door was privacy. The way she started keeping her phone face down at dinner was a work boundary. Even the perfume she suddenly wore after years of saying strong scents gave her headaches became one more lie I told myself because the truth was too humiliating to touch. She had gotten sharper with me too, cruel in this polished, controlled way that made me question my own memory. If I asked why she was distant, she would smirk and say, "Not every mood I have is about you." If I asked why she smiled at her screen and then went blank when I walked in, she would tell me I was insecure, needy, paranoid, all those convenient little words that make a man shut up because he does not want to become the husband everybody pities. The next morning she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed our son on the head, sipped coffee at the counter, and told me I looked tired, which almost made me choke. Then she left for work and forgot her tablet on the couch. I was not even trying to snoop at first. I picked it up to bring it to her car, but the screen lit up with her messages already open, and there it was, a thread pinned at the top under a fake woman's name I had never heard before. The last message said, "Last night scared me." He looked right at the phone. My hands started shaking so bad I had to sit down. I opened it anyway, and what I found was not just flirting, not just a mistake, but weeks of inside jokes, hotel plans, complaints about me, and one message from her that hit harder than anything else. "He still believes whatever I tell him." I read that line over and over until the words stopped looking real. I wish I could say I exploded, but I did not. I just sat there in my own living room feeling my whole life turn rotten around me. Then I scrolled higher and saw a photo I recognized instantly, not because of what was in it, but because of where it was taken. It was the back room of my best friend Daniel's bar, the place she told me she hated, the place she swore she had not set foot in for over a year. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I had missed a step in the dark, because under the picture she had written, "He has no idea you're the one helping me cover this." And that was the moment I stopped wondering whether my wife was betraying me and started realizing I might not even know how many people were. I was still staring at that message when I heard her car door slam outside, and my whole body locked up like I had just been caught doing something wrong in my own house. I dropped the tablet back exactly where it had been, sat down, and tried to slow my breathing, but my chest felt tight, like the air had turned thick. When she walked in, she smiled at me the same way she always did, soft, practiced, like nothing in the world had shifted, and said, "Hey, did you see my tablet anywhere?" And I swear there was a moment where I almost handed it to her and apologized for even thinking anything was off. That is what she had trained me to do, doubt myself before I ever doubted her. I looked at her and said, "Yeah, it's on the couch," and watched her eyes flick there just a little too fast, like she needed to check something immediately. She picked it up, unlocked it, and I saw her thumb move quickly, clearing something. Then she exhaled like she had just avoided a problem. That was the moment something inside me hardened, because she did not ask what I had seen. She did not even hesitate. She just assumed I would stay blind if she moved fast enough. I said, as calmly as I could, "Who's Melissa texting you from a truck?" And she froze for half a second before turning back with that same controlled irritation and said, "Are we really doing this again? It's exhausting. I felt my jaw tighten, and I said, "You said it was Melissa." And she shrugged like I was wasting her time, like I was a child tugging on her sleeve. "It is Melissa," she said, then added, "Her boyfriend drives a truck. I grabbed something from it. You're building a whole story out of nothing." The confidence in her voice was unreal, like she had rehearsed this exact answer, and for a second I almost believed her again, until I remembered the message, the thread, the way she wrote about me like I was a fool she managed. I stepped closer and said quietly, "Then why did you say I still believe whatever you tell me?" That was the first crack. Her face did not explode into guilt or panic. It shifted into something colder, something calculating. She tilted her head slightly and said, "You went through my messages?" Like that was the real betrayal here, like that was the thing that mattered. I felt this rush of anger and humiliation all at once, and I said, "Answer the question." And she laughed, actually laughed. A short, sharp sound that did not belong to the woman I thought I married. "You're twisting things," she said, stepping past me. "I vent to friends sometimes. Everyone does. It doesn't mean anything." I followed her into the kitchen, my heart pounding harder with every step, and said, "Who's Daniel in that picture?" And she stopped dead. For the first time, she did not have an immediate answer, and in that silence, I heard everything I needed to hear. Then she turned slowly, eyes narrowing, and said, "Why are you digging like this? What are you hoping to find?" Like I was the one creating the damage. Like this was all just some obsession of mine spiraling out of control. And that is when it got worse. Because instead of denying it, instead of reassuring me, she crossed her arms and said, almost bored, "You know what your problem is? You want to be the victim so badly that you'll invent one." And I felt something inside me drop. Because that was not just deflection, that was warping reality itself. I stood there staring at her and said, "Daniel is my best friend." And she held my gaze without flinching and replied, "Then maybe you should ask yourself why he doesn't respect you either." And in that moment, I realized this was not just an affair anymore. It was something much deeper, something that had been building behind my back with people I trusted, and I had no idea how far it actually went. I don't even remember deciding to grab my keys. I just know the next thing I heard was the front door slamming behind me and my own breathing echoing too loud in my head as I stood on the porch trying to piece together what she had just said. "Why he doesn't respect you either." That sentence kept looping, twisting, digging into places I didn't want to go. Because Daniel wasn't just some guy. He was the one who stood next to me at my wedding, the one who held my son when he was born, the one who used to call my wife family, like it meant something real. I sat in my car for a minute staring at nothing. Then I did the worst thing I could have done for my own sanity. I called him. He picked up on the second ring like always, relaxed, normal, like nothing in the world was wrong, and said, "Hey man, what's up?" And I swear that almost broke me more than anything else because his voice didn't carry even a hint of guilt. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse, I just said, "Were you with my wife last night?" And there was this pause, not long, but long enough. Just enough silence to confirm everything before he even opened his mouth. Then he chuckled, actually chuckled, and said, "What kind of question is that?" Like I had just asked something ridiculous, like I was the one crossing a line. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and said, "Answer me." And his tone shifted just slightly. Not defensive, not panicked, just careful. "She came by the bar for a bit," he said. "We had a drink, talked, that's it." And I could hear the lie sitting inside his words, polished and ready, just like hers. I closed my eyes and said, "Did she leave anything in your truck?" And this time the silence stretched longer, heavy, suffocating. And when he finally spoke, his voice had that edge to it, that quiet irritation people get when they realize you're not as blind as they hoped. "Why are you going through her stuff?" he asked, flipping it back on me like they both had rehearsed the same defense. That's when it clicked in a way that made my stomach turn. This wasn't random. This wasn't messy or careless. This was coordinated. The same deflection, the same strategy, the same calm attempt to make me feel like the problem instead of the person being lied to. I let out this hollow laugh and said, "You two really think I'm that stupid?" And his response came sharper this time. "I think you're overreacting." And there it was, the same phrase, almost word for word, like they had practiced it together. I hung up before he could say anything else because I suddenly didn't trust myself to stay calm, and I just sat there gripping the wheel, feeling something dark settle in my chest. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was this obsessive need to know how long, how deep, how many lies I had swallowed without even realizing it. My phone buzzed almost immediately, her name lighting up the screen, and I knew before I answered that whatever she was about to say wasn't going to be the truth. I picked up anyway, and before I could even speak, she said, her voice low and controlled, "What did you say to Daniel?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We need to talk." Just that, like her biggest concern was managing the situation, not fixing what she'd done. I felt something in me snap into place, cold and focused, and I said, "I asked him about the earring," and there was a brief silence before she sighed, not guilty, not scared, just annoyed, and said, "You're making this so much bigger than it is." I stared out through the windshield, my reflection barely visible in the glass, and said quietly, "Then explain it." And she didn't hesitate this time, not even a second, just said, "Fine, I'll explain everything, but you're not going to like it." And the way she said it, calm, almost prepared, made my stomach drop because it didn't sound like someone caught in a lie. It sounded like someone finally ready to tell a version of the truth that would hurt even more. I stayed on the phone, gripping it so tight my hand started to ache. Because something in her voice told me this wasn't going to be a denial anymore. This was going to be her version of the truth, the one she had been holding back until she felt in control again. I said, "Then explain it." And she let out this slow breath like I was exhausting her, like I was forcing her into something unreasonable, and said, "Daniel isn't just your friend. He's been helping me figure things out." The way she said it made my skin crawl, vague enough to mean anything, deliberate enough to avoid saying the one thing I needed to hear. I felt my throat tighten and said, "Figure what out?" And she didn't even hesitate, just replied, "Us," like that word still belonged to both of us. I laughed under my breath because it sounded insane, like she was rewriting the entire situation in real time, and I said, "So sneaking around with him, lying to me, that's you figuring us out?" And she snapped back immediately, sharper now. "See, this is why I didn't tell you anything. You twist everything into something ugly." It was unbelievable how quickly she flipped it, how naturally she turned my reaction into the problem instead of what she'd been doing behind my back. I leaned my head against the steering wheel and said quietly, "Did you sleep with him?" And there was a pause, longer than before, long enough that I could hear her breathing on the other end, steady, controlled, like she was choosing her words carefully. "Why does that matter right now?" she finally said. And that answer hit harder than anything else because it wasn't a no. It wasn't even a lie. It was avoidance dressed up as logic, and I felt something inside me drop into a place I couldn't pull it back from. I lifted my head and said, "Because it matters to me." And she let out a small, irritated laugh and said, "You're focusing on the wrong thing, like always." And then she lowered her voice slightly, almost like she was trying to sound reasonable. "This didn't just happen out of nowhere, okay? You've been distant for years. You don't listen, you don't see me, and Daniel actually does." I just stared forward, not even reacting at first, because it was like listening to someone justify burning your house down by complaining about the paint color. "You could have talked to me," I said finally, and she cut me off instantly. "I tried," and I could hear the frustration building now. "But you never hear anything unless it's about you." That one landed in a way I wasn't ready for. Not because it was true, But because she said it with such conviction, it made me question myself for half a second, and she took that silence as an opening. "You think this is about one night or some stupid earring?" she continued. "But this has been building for a long time." I swallowed hard and said, "So how long?" And this time she didn't dodge it, didn't soften it, just said, flat and calm, "A few months," like she was talking about a work project, not something that could destroy everything we built. My grip tightened again, and I whispered, "Behind my back, with him." And she replied, almost defensively now, "It wasn't like that at first," which somehow made it worse, because it meant there was a progression, a story, a whole timeline I knew nothing about. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady myself, and then asked the one question I didn't want to hear the answer to. "Who else knows?" And there was a shift on the line, subtle but real, like I had just stepped into something bigger than I realized. She hesitated, just for a moment, then said, "What do you mean?" But it sounded forced, like she was buying time, and that was when the dread came back, heavier than before, because if she had to think about that, then I already knew the answer wasn't going to be just him. That hesitation was louder than anything she had said so far, and I felt it settle in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I said, "Don't do that," my voice low, steady in a way that surprised even me. "Don't pretend you don't know what I mean." And she exhaled sharply, like I was pushing her into a corner she didn't want to be in. "You're spiraling again," she replied, and I could hear that familiar edge creeping back, that tone she used when she wanted to make me feel irrational instead of hurt. "There's no everyone, okay? You're making it bigger than it is." But I wasn't letting that go anymore, not after everything I had already seen. "Then say it clearly," I said, my heart pounding harder now. "No one else knows? No one helped you lie to me?" And the silence that followed was different this time, heavier, stretched thin like it might snap if either of us breathed too hard. When she finally spoke, her voice dropped, quieter, more careful, and that alone told me everything was about to get worse. "It's not what you think," she said, and I almost laughed because that line had become meaningless. "Then tell me what it is," I pressed, and she hesitated again before saying, "I talked to Jenna about it, and a couple people from work, like she was easing me into it, like she was hoping I'd accept that as the full truth. But all I could hear was confirmation that this wasn't hidden in the way I thought. It wasn't some secret mistake buried in the dark. It had been discussed, analyzed, shared, turned into something casual enough to talk about over coffee while I sat at home believing everything was fine. I swallowed hard and said, "My best friend and your co-workers knew you were sneaking around behind my back, and nobody thought to say anything to me." And she snapped back immediately, defensive now, because it's not their place. And I felt something twist inside me at how easily she justified that, how normal she made it sound. "It's our marriage," she continued, "not some group project where everyone reports back to you." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it, pacing beside my car now, trying to burn off the pressure building inside me. "You turned it into that," I said, "the second you involved him and them." And she let out a frustrated sigh, like I was missing the point on purpose. "You're obsessed with the wrong details," she said, her voice tightening. "You're so focused on who knew instead of why this happened." That word again, why, like there was a clean explanation that could justify months of lies. I stopped pacing and said quietly, "Because you wanted to." And she immediately fired back, "Because I felt invisible." Her voice rising now, sharper, more emotional, like she was finally stepping fully into her defense. "Because I've been unhappy for a long time and you never noticed," she added. And there it was again, the shift, the way she tried to turn the entire narrative so that I wasn't the one being betrayed. I was the one who caused it. For a second, I just stood there, letting that sink in, feeling the anger mix with something worse, something quieter, like humiliation spreading under my skin. Then I asked, almost without thinking, "Did you ever plan to tell me?" And she didn't answer right away. which somehow hurt more than anything else she'd said. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, but not in a way that felt honest, more like she was trying to manage me again. "I didn't know how," she said. I let out a slow breath and said, "So you were just going to keep going?" And she snapped back, "No, that's not fair." But she didn't actually deny it, and that silence between what she said and what she didn't say filled in the rest for me. I looked up at my house, at the place that suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore, and said one last thing before I could stop myself. "Does he think you're leaving me?" And this time, she didn't hesitate at all. She didn't hesitate at all. And that was the part that destroyed whatever hope I didn't realize I was still holding on to. "Yes," she said, flat, certain, like it had already been decided somewhere without me. I felt my chest tighten so hard I had to lean against the car just to stay steady, and for a second I couldn't even speak, because that one word carried everything she hadn't said out loud before. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't a mistake she was trying to fix. It was a direction she was already moving in, with him, with other people knowing, with me as the last one to catch up. I forced myself to ask, "Since when?" And she sighed like I was dragging this out unnecessarily, like I was the one refusing to accept something obvious. "We've talked about it," she said, choosing her words carefully again. Not seriously, just what it would look like. What it would look like. I repeated that in my head like it might suddenly make sense, like there was some version of reality where my wife planning a future with my best friend could be explained in a way that didn't feel like complete betrayal. I swallowed hard and said, "In my house?" And she immediately corrected me. "Our house," with that same sharp tone, like she needed to remind me that she still had equal claim to everything, even now, even after everything I had just learned. "Don't twist it into something it's not," she added, and I almost laughed again because that had become her favorite line, like reality itself was something flexible she could reshape if she said it confidently enough. I pushed off the car and started pacing again, my mind racing faster now, connecting things I hadn't wanted to connect before. "So, all those nights you said you were working late," I started, and she cut me off. "Not all of them." Like that distinction mattered. Like that somehow softened it. "God," I muttered under my breath, running a hand through my hair. "How many times?" And she snapped back, "Why does a number change anything?" And that answer hit me in a way I wasn't ready for because it told me there was a number, and it wasn't small. I stopped walking and just stood there, staring at the ground, feeling this mix of anger and something heavier, something closer to disbelief. "You let me sit there with him," I said quietly. "You let me joke with him, trust him." While this was going on, and she didn't even try to deny that part. Instead, she said, "I didn't plan for it to happen like this." Like that was supposed to make it better. Like intention somehow erased what she had actually done. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady myself, but all I could see was every moment replaying differently now. Every conversation, every laugh, every time she said his name without a hint of what was really behind it. "Does he come over when I'm not there?" I asked, my voice quieter now, almost numb. And she hesitated just long enough to confirm it before she even answered. "A couple times," she admitted. And I felt something inside me finally give way, like whatever foundation I had been standing on just collapsed completely. I let out a slow breath and said, "In my house?" again. And this time she didn't correct me, didn't argue, just stayed silent on the other end of the line. And that silence said more than anything else could have. Then, after a few seconds, she spoke again. Softer now, but still not apologetic. Still not what I needed it to be. "You're acting like I did this to hurt you," she said. And I opened my eyes, staring straight ahead, because that sentence felt so disconnected from reality, I almost didn't know how to respond. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she added. And I felt my jaw tighten because that wasn't remorse. That was regret about consequences, about being caught. about things becoming real. I shook my head slowly and said, "You didn't mean for me to find out." And she didn't respond right away. And that pause confirmed it more than any admission could. Then she said something that made everything shift again. Something I wasn't prepared for. Something that reframed the entire situation in a way that made my stomach drop all over again. Her voice lowered, almost cautious now. And she said, "You keep saying Daniel like he's the only one involved. But that's not really true." That sentence didn't just land. It rewrote everything in real time. Like the ground shifted under me and I hadn't even realized how unstable it already was. I felt my stomach drop so fast it almost made me dizzy. And I said, "What does that mean?" But my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. It sounded thinner, like something had already been taken out of it. She didn't answer right away, and that silence stretched, heavy and deliberate, like she was deciding how much to reveal without losing control of the narrative. "Just don't jump to conclusions," she said finally. And I let out a hollow breath because that phrase had become her shield, something she hid behind every time the truth got too close. "You don't get to say that anymore," I replied. Sharper now, because I could feel something shifting inside me, not breaking, but hardening in a way that felt unfamiliar. "You already lied about everything else, so say it clearly," I added, and for the first time, she didn't push back immediately. "It wasn't just Daniel," she admitted, her voice lower, almost cautious now, and I felt my grip tighten on the phone again, my heart pounding so loud it filled my ears. I stared out at nothing, bracing myself, and said, "Who else?" And she exhaled slowly, like this was somehow difficult for her, like she was the one being forced into something unfair. "There were other people," she said, vague again, still trying to soften it, still trying to keep control. "Names," I said, cutting straight through it, because I couldn't take another vague answer, not now, not after everything else. There was a pause, longer this time, and when she finally spoke, she didn't sound defensive. She sounded measured, like she had already accepted this part. "It didn't start physical with anyone else," she said, dodging the question again, and I felt this surge of frustration and anger hit all at once. "I didn't ask how it started," I snapped. "I asked who." She went quiet again, and I could hear her breathing, steady, controlled, like she was thinking 3 steps ahead of me. Then she said a name that made my chest tighten immediately. "Chris," she said, and my mind went blank for a second before snapping back into place, because Chris wasn't just some random person. He was someone I worked with, someone who had been in my house for dinners, someone who had shaken my hand and looked me in the eye like none of this existed. I felt my voice drop, colder now, and said, "My coworker?" And she quickly added, "It wasn't like that." But that didn't matter anymore. The damage was already done the second she said his name. I ran a hand over my face, trying to process it, but she wasn't finished. "And Mark," she continued, quieter this time, like she knew this one would hit differently, and it did, because Mark was my cousin. I actually laughed then, but there was nothing real in it, just disbelief spilling out because I didn't know what else to do. "My friend, my coworker, my family," I said slowly, piecing it together out loud, and she immediately tried to step in. "You're making it sound worse than it is." And that was the moment something inside me finally snapped completely into clarity. "Worse than it is?" I repeated, my voice steady in a way it hadn't been before. "You built an entire second life out of people I trusted." And she didn't deny it, didn't argue that part, just said, "It's more complicated than that," like complexity somehow excused betrayal. I shook my head slowly, even though she couldn't see it, and said, "No. It's really not." Because for the first time since this started, everything felt brutally simple. Then I asked the one question that suddenly mattered more than anything else, the one thing that could somehow still make this even worse. Does anyone in my life not know about this? The question hung there between us, heavy and unavoidable, and for the first time since this started, She didn't rush to answer, didn't try to soften it, didn't flip it back on me. That silence told me more than any words could have, and I felt something inside me go completely still, like the last piece had just clicked into place whether I wanted it to or not. "Just say it," I murmured, my voice almost calm now, because I didn't have anything left to brace for, not really. She let out a slow breath and said, "Not everyone." But the way she said it, careful, incomplete, made it worse than a straight yes ever could have. I closed my eyes for a second and nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see it, because of course it wasn't everyone. Of course there were still people who didn't know, but that wasn't the point anymore. "Who does?" I asked quietly, because I needed to understand the scope of it, how far this had spread without me realizing. She hesitated again, then said, "Jenna, a couple people at work, Daniel obviously, and Chris found out on his own. Like she was listing ordinary things, like she was reciting a grocery list instead of naming the people who had stood around my life knowing it was a lie." I felt my chest tighten, but it wasn't the same sharp pain anymore. It was heavier, duller, like something settling in permanently. "And Mark?" I asked, already knowing the answer, and she didn't even try to dodge it this time. "He knows," she admitted. I let out a slow breath and leaned back against the car again, staring up at nothing, because there was nowhere else to look. "So, I'm the only one who didn't," I said, and she immediately replied, "That's not fair." But there was no conviction behind it this time, no sharp edge, just a weak attempt to keep control of something that had already slipped. I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. "It's exactly fair," I said. "You made sure of that." There was a pause, and then she said something softer, something that might have sounded like regret if it had come earlier. "I didn't want to hurt you like this." And I shook my head slowly, because that sentence didn't mean anything anymore. "You didn't want to deal with it," I corrected, my voice steady. "There's a difference." She didn't argue that. For once, she just stayed quiet. I looked back at the house again, at the life I thought was mine, and felt this strange clarity settle in. Not relief, not even anger, just understanding. "You said you felt invisible," I said after a moment. "But I was right there the whole time. You just chose to build something else behind my back instead of talking to me." She inhaled like she was about to respond, but I didn't give her the chance this time. "Don't," I said quietly, cutting her off before she could reshape it again, because I finally understood how this worked, how every explanation was just another layer of control. "I've heard enough." And for the first time since this started, I meant it. She went silent on the other end, and after a few seconds she asked, almost cautiously, "What are you going to do?" And that question felt different now. Not challenging, not defensive, just uncertain. I thought about it for a moment, really thought about it, and realized something that should have been obvious from the start, but somehow never was. "I'm going to stop letting you tell me what this is," I said, my voice calm, grounded in a way it hadn't been before. "Because this isn't complicated. You lied, you built a second life with people I trusted, and you expected me to stay blind to it." I paused, then added, "That's all it is." There was nothing she could twist in that, nothing she could reframe, and for the first time, she didn't try. The line stayed quiet, and I finally pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen for a second before ending the call. As I stood there in the silence, one thought kept repeating in my head. Not loud, not frantic, just clear. This wasn't the moment my marriage broke. This was just the moment I finally saw it had been broken for a long time.